All right, everybody can see the presentation.
Yes, yeah, all clear.
So, hi everyone. I just wanted to start off by saying thank you for having us and thank you for being here. It's unfortunate that we couldn't all meet in person, but regardless, we're both super happy to be here and be a part of this conference. So with that, let's get started. So this is our undergraduate research project. I'm Juliet.
And I'm Harleena.
And we decided to study the gender stereotypes found in Disney princess films. So just a quick introduction. We do have a third member in our group, but she was unable to present with us today. But like I said, I'm Juliet, and I'm actually a psychology student here at Ottawa. I'm interested in using what I know about psychology and what I learned in this communications class to really expand and network beyond my psychology program. My colleague Harleena is a communication student who took the popular culture course with the hopes to benefit her program and to also expand her knowledge on modern media. We conducted this research as a part of our popular culture class, which was led by Jennifer Dumoulin, and it was our final project that we were assigned. We both have had exposure to Disney princesses growing up, so this study was something that we could really relate to, and it made it much more interesting to do as well. It also really gave us a chance to inform ourselves and others about the stereotypes that are found in films, especially Disney films.
Okay, so just a bit of background on our research project. So the portrayal of women in popular culture has been problemsome, as traditional gender stereotypes are often perpetuated onto female characters in TV shows, films, and other types of media. As we all know, Disney princesses are no exception to this. They are global phenomenons that are widely recognized pop culture figures, and their influence on their audience can be substantial and long-lasting. So the rationale for our study was that we wanted to better understand the portrayal of women, and in particular Disney princesses, in pop culture. We came up with 3 different hypotheses that provided us with enough insight to answer our research question, which was, does the readapted live-action version of the Disney princess movie Cinderella differ from the original animated version in its portrayal of women? So just going over our hypotheses for this project, our first hypothesis was that Disney has adopted a more egalitarian mindset when recreating or reimagining Disney princesses. In our study, we primarily looked at the Princess Cinderella in both her live action and animated movies to examine whether or not her behavioral characteristics have changed from her first film, which was in the 1950s, to her latest film in 2015. Our second hypothesis believed live-action movies differ in their representation of Disney princesses compared to animated movies. In the sources we examined, there was very little mention on how varying film methods may impact the way Disney princesses are portrayed. We believed that the change in film would have an impact on the portrayal of important characters in the movie Cinderella. Our final hypothesis believed that different historical eras and cultural norms influenced how Disney princesses were presented in their films. We believe that the 65-year gap in which the Cinderella animated film and the live-action film were released had an impact on how Cinderella was presented in each film. Cultural and societal norms were vastly different during these eras, and the role of women in society has significantly changed in the last 65 years. So we looked at the potential impacts of these cultural, societal, and historical differences to see if Disney has indeed presented Cinderella in a particular way to fit the societal norms during each era. So in order to better understand the field we were studying, we completed a literature review, which provided a sort of foundation of information for us to build upon. In completing our lit review, we found many similarities in the studies we analyzed. One of the main topics looked at in the studies we examined was the use of stereotypical language and behavior in Disney princess films. So the use of derogatory or belittling language or statements to define and describe the Disney princesses. Another main topic discussed in our lit review sources was the effects of Disney princess media on young children. So the use of films, TV shows, toys, even clothing, what effects these things have on young children and childhood development. Finally, many of the sources we looked at talked about the representation of racialized Disney princesses in films. So these sources looked at princesses like Mulan, Princess Tiana, Princess Jasmine, and how they were presented in their respective films and what sort of the implications of them being in these films had on young children. In terms of gaps in the research we analyzed, like I had mentioned, we found that none of the sources really talked about film methods, so how the format of a film could alter how certain characters were portrayed. And this kind of helped guide us towards our research topic, which was comparing live action and animated Disney princess films. So just to continue our background, for our research project, we established several key concepts that helped fine-tune our research and provide us with a better understanding of what exactly we wanted to discuss for this project. So the key concepts we defined were gender stereotyping, Disney princess, so what actually establishes or makes a Disney princess, live action, and animation. So for these last two terms, live action and animation, we wanted to make sure they were clearly defined just because a major part of our project was comparing these two film methods. So we wanted to make sure we knew exactly what we meant when we were using these terms in our research, just because they were very important in the overall study.
All right, so for the methodology, we decided to conduct a content analysis by comparing the live action version versus the animated version of Cinderella. The 1950s animated version was 75 minutes, and the 2015 live action is 105 minutes. So we divided both these versions equally into 3 parts for each group member to thoroughly analyze. Here we have included the timestamps on this slide for both the movies that we used in our study. And this was the most efficient method for us since we did have limited timing and wanted to make sure that we properly analyzed the films that we were using. And we created a comparison chart on a Word document and input any key elements that would support or perhaps contradict our hypotheses. So in that document, the key elements that we were looking for were things in the films such as speech, descriptive words used, character attire, symbolism, and even other stereotypical aspects that princesses usually tend to possess, such as singing or having animal friends.
Okay, so as Juliet mentioned, we divided up each movie into 3 parts to analyze. I'm just going to go over some of the major findings in each part. So for part 1 in the animated version, Cinderella was often defined as being very gentle and kind. So we saw that there was this sort of stereotypical language used in the animated version to define who Cinderella was. In part 1 of the live action film, Cinderella was described by the prince as not a pretty girl or not just a pretty girl. So we found in this version, they were really trying to emphasize that there was more to Cinderella than just her looks and to how she was presented at face value. Going back to part 2 of the animated version, we saw a princess stereotype being established with Cinderella having animals as her friends. While this is still carried out in the live action film, it isn't as prominent. Cinderella doesn't necessarily rely on the animals to save her like she does in the animated version. Her intelligence is shown through her ability to save herself, as well as her ability to outsmart the people around her. So in part 2 of the live action film, Cinderella actually speaks French. This was not included in the animated version, so we can see that there is a clear difference in how Cinderella carries herself in both films. Finally, in part 3 of the animated version, Cinderella can be seen being completely dazed and in a trance thinking about the prince. She sings her famous song, "A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes," and is just completely engulfed in these feelings. And this kind of displays that, once again, stereotypical princess behavior, as all she can seem to think about is the prince. However, in part 3 of the live action film, Cinderella can be seen actually standing up to her stepmother and fighting not just for herself, but for the prince and for the entire kingdom. And so this is quite different compared to the animated version, in which Cinderella heavily relied on others around her to save her. In the live action film, Cinderella essentially saves herself. And so we just put in a clip here of Cinderella speaking French from the live action film. We felt that this was a really important clip to highlight because it really speaks to Cinderella's education and her intelligence, which was something that was just completely overlooked in the animated film.
À la mode parisienne.
She doesn't know what that means. Mais bien sûr que je connais la mode parisienne. Et je vais m'en occuper.
Good. Right, that's settled then. Now go!
So yeah, as we saw, Cinderella's stepmother and her stepsisters were kind of surprised that she could even speak French. So once again, this kind of showcases that there is more to Cinderella than just the princess sort of stereotypes that are established.
So for our discussion, in our study, we wanted to see whether or not there was a difference between the live action and the animated Disney princess movies in regard to how they portrayed the female characters. Through our content analysis, we found that Disney has created more of an egalitarian depiction with the newer live action film. This egalitarian depiction was done by including key scenes throughout the film that were not in the previous 1950s version. We determined that a potential influence on this change could be the historical norms that were in place at the time of the original film being made. Currently, we can see that newer Disney princess movies such as Frozen, Brave, Moana break away from traditional Disney princess portrayals. My favorite example of this is a movie that I think, if we're not all familiar with, most of us are familiar with, which is Frozen. This movie follows a story of two sister princesses and their journey to save their own kingdom, rather than the story of a princess being saved by a prince. Some limitations that we came across were the fact that we didn't have an extensive amount of time to do a more in-depth analysis, considering that we did have other courses to complete, and so we only analyzed the Cinderella movies, but including several other films could have furthered our research. We were also unable to meet in person given the current situation in the world, so that made it a little bit harder to work together, but we managed to make it work, obviously. So in conclusion, we think it would be also beneficial to conduct a similar study, but looking at stereotypes of Disney princes, since men are also just as important to include in these kinds of studies as well. And it would also be interesting to see how this research could be studied in a behavioral sense or a developmental sense, like how it not only affects children, but throughout adulthood as well, since most of the research that we conducted was mostly focused on children. And our hope is that this study will help individuals who wish to examine the relationship between traditional gender roles and Disney princess characters.
Okay, so just to end our presentation, we just once again wanted to thank Jennifer Dumoulin, who was our professor for the study. She provided us with all the tools we needed to be successful in this project, so we're really thankful for her. We also wanted to thank Wenxi Zhu, who was our co-author for this research presentation or project. And finally, we just wanted to thank all of you for listening to our presentation. I think I can speak for both Juliet and I when I say that we're super happy that we were given this opportunity. This is our first time doing anything like InterCOMM, and so we're really grateful that we were able to share our research with you all. So we've included our U Ottawa emails as well as our Facebook, so if anybody wanted to get into contact with us, that's how you would do it. Once again, thank you so much, and yeah, if there's any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Juliet and Harleena, for a fantastic presentation. You guys really helped to round out this fabulous panel of undergraduate students. We have time for one question, and I see that Professor Nahal Sarafati has raised his hand, so I'll open the mic there.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Well, first, I would like to congratulate all the students for these excellent presentations. I'm really glad that I was able to be here today. And also would like to congratulate Jennifer Dumoulin because this is a great initiative. I mean, the fact that they did all these projects in your course, but also that they're now presenting in InterCOMM. My question for the group who did this interesting research about Cinderella is that, as you know, all these stories, you know, all these fairy tales, let's say, like Cinderella, Snow White, well, you know, all of them, they are very old stories, very old, very ancient stories. They have almost, let's say, kind of a mythical element. And then, do you think that, I mean, there is something more than just the social norms of a certain time? There is something deeper in these stories about the human condition. And it's not just about the social norms of, you know, maybe 50 years ago or the current social norms, but there is something deeper in these stories. What do you think about that?
Go ahead, Juliet. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think everyone wishes to have like sort of a fairy tale story in their lives. So that perhaps could have something to do with it, and not necessarily just all about cultural norms, but I think it's just something that everyone wishes to have, sort of like a fairy tale story to tell people in their lives.
Yeah, and I think just to build off of what Juliet was saying, I think there is something like you were touching on. There is this sort of human aspect of wanting things to work out and kind of believing. And I think that's kind of why Disney princesses are as popular as they are, because they give a sense of hope, and they almost present like the ideal picture in a way for what people may want in their lives. But as we demonstrated in our research, sometimes this can have negative effects on the audiences that they are making these films for. So I think it's important to acknowledge that there might be that sort of human need for this sort of fairy tale ending or this fairy tale lifestyle, but there's always two sides to the story, and while there may be some sort of positive aspects to it, there are also negative implications of believing in these stories.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both for your answer, and thank you, Professor Nahon Serafati, for your question. We've actually run out of time for the popular culture panel, so I'd like to take a moment and thank Will and Jacqueline, Haley and Georgia, Madison and Ned, and Harleena and Juliet for going above and beyond. Our class ended in December of last year, and you have really put in extra time and effort and energy to present at our conference today, and you're trailblazers. We hope that this is something that future undergraduate students will be able to do as well. So thank you all for your time. Thank you for all of your hard work in our course and today. And I hope that we get to keep in touch. And thank you everybody for listening. And that brings us to the end of this panel. Alors, on a terminé nos présentations sur la culture populaire et on va commencer notre prochaine série.